The first rule of creative writing is show, don't tell. I found it to be a confusing concept when it was first introduced to me as an elementary schooler because, in my child mind, writing is only telling, and you cannot show images on a flat piece of paper in the same way you can on a stage, television, canvas, or cinema screen. However, it's a timeless formula for storytelling because it invites the reader, viewer, or listener to use their imagination just as much as the author. Employing this principle into a movie can be a tricky task. One would think that because you are filming people acting out scenes and scenarios, the show portion is already covered. Not so. The 1967 film The Graduate follows Benjamin, who is having an affair with an older married woman, Mrs. Robinson, and later begins dating her daughter, Elaine. Though he only went out with Elaine at first because he felt like he was forced to, he ends up genuinely liking her and arrives at her house to pick her up for a second date. Mrs. Robinson had forbidden Benjamin from seeing Elaine, so she is understandably angry about this, and she tells Benjamin that she will reveal their secrets if he continues to see Elaine. In an attempt to maintain the upper hand, Benjamin rushes into the house to confess to Elaine in the hope that his honesty will mend any potential feelings of betrayal. See, Elaine already knew that Benjamin had had a past affair with an older married woman, but she didn't know who it was. Now, Benjamin very well could just tell Elaine that he's been sleeping with her mother, which is what he intends to do. However, the scene instead plays out like this.
Benjamin! Benjamin!
Elaine.
What are you doing?
Elaine, I have to tell you something.
What is it?
That woman.
What?
That woman, that older woman that I told you about.
You mean that
Yes,
one?
the married woman. That wasn't just some woman.
What are you telling me? Benjamin, will you just tell me what this is all about?
Showing this series of glances achieves so much more than if Benjamin simply tells Elaine about him and her mother. It allows the audience to not only empathize with every single character involved in this confrontation, but to also feel the weight of Elaine's realization, which hits so much harder than any line of dialogue ever could. I recently watched Sophie Rambari's feature-length directorial debut, Blue Heron, thanks to its availability on the Criterion channel. I was compelled by the description of the film, which reads as follows. In the late 1990s, 8-year-old Sasha and her Hungarian immigrant family relocate to a new home on Vancouver Island. Their fresh start is interrupted by increasingly dangerous behavior from Jeremy, the family's oldest child. The film presents itself as a devastating family drama with its striking cinematography laden with dreamy landscape shots and appropriately moody lighting, soft-spoken character interactions, and lengthy individual scenes, but its restrictive apprehension towards its subject matter results in the whole of the film being lesser than the sum of its parts, and that is because the film neither tells nor shows the complexity of its subject matter. The film is also strikingly similar to Charlotte Wells' 2022 film Aftersun, and the similarities are as follows. They are both feature-length debuts of a female director in her 30s that take place in the 90s. They are told from the perspective of the self-insert child version of the writer-director. Both films involve a heavy use of VHS footage or photography to transport the viewer directly into the time period. Both films are intended as a therapeutic exploration of an older male family member's concerning behavior, and at various points feature dreamlike sequences where the adult protagonist interacts with the male family member. Finally, both have a heavy reliance on mood, atmosphere, intimacy, and character interactions to drive the story rather than distinctive plot beats. Structurally, the narratives of the films are quite different. Aftersun has a distinctive plot trajectory in the form of a vacation, with the film inevitably concluding at the end of the trip, whereas Blue Heron is far more abstract throughout its runtime, with the only distinctive plot beat being the family moving into their new house at the very beginning. The character dynamics also differ quite significantly, with Aftersun spending most of its runtime focused on the singular dynamic of Sophie's relationship with her father Callum, and Blue Heron with a far more broad focus on a family of 6. Though the subject matter and subsequent approaches of both films are strikingly similar, Aftersun feels far more poignant and effective than Blue Heron. Aftersun features a directly inverse character trajectory, with Sophie encountering coming-of-age childhood experiences like making new friends, having her first kiss, and trying to understand her father's deep sadness from her 11-year-old perspective, while Callum practices Tai Chi, reads self-help books, and confesses to a stranger that he can't see himself reaching 40, and he's surprised that he even made it to 30. This establishes a complex and devastating contrast between Callum and his daughter by granting the viewer the perspective of both characters and purposefully examining how much Callum is struggling to handle his depression while simultaneously trying to mask it and appear happy for his daughter during their vacation. Blue Heron, on the other hand, is ultimately far too subtle, meandering, and lacking in focus to land. Its quiet patience and methodical cinematography don't amount to much more than calming vibes and pretty visuals. The movie is laden with lingering landscape shots showing the house and the city around it, but the characters are often absent from these shots. When characters are featured, it's often in extreme close-ups on telephoto lenses that leave them feeling disconnected from the environment and subsequently disconnected from one another. These close-ups are the primary method of framing the characters, and this flattens the narrative effect of the character journeys because almost all conversations or interactions look the same. This lack of variety is especially apparent with the film's attention on Jeremy, the supposedly troubled eldest child of the family, and he barely even registers as a character. The movie has a runtime of almost exactly 1 hour and 30 minutes before the end credits start. Not including background shots, Jeremy is featured on screen for only about 12 minutes of the total runtime. 1 hour and 30 minutes is exactly 100 minutes, meaning Jeremy is only on screen for about 12% of the movie. Now, this isn't inherently bad on its own. Cinema is a visual medium after all, and there are plenty of opportunities beyond dialogue to convey a character's complexity or depth through visual cues or actor physicality. To give a cliche example, Hannibal Lecter is only on screen in Silence of the Lambs for about 25 minutes, which is about 18% of the film's runtime. However, he is widely regarded as one of the greatest villains in all of cinema due entirely to the power of his dialogue, physicality, and chilling chemistry with Clarice. Jeremy barely even feels like a character because his sparse screen time only includes one single complete line of dialogue, and it's not even with Sasha.
Stop it.
I don't want to watch you eat.
He does technically speak to Sasha eventually, however, it's in a fantasy dream sequence where Jeremy is just a projection of her memories, so it doesn't even take place during the actual plot portion of the film. With almost no dialogue and barely any interaction with our protagonist, Jeremy feels like an inconsequential background character in the movie that is supposedly about trying to figure him out, and thus the entire core of the movie is rendered unstable. Just as much as the film neglects to establish any tangible sense of individualism or emotional investment in Jeremy, we also barely get to know Sasha herself. Though she has more dialogue than Jeremy, most of it is centered around him, and its vague, speculative, and apprehensive nature only accentuates how little we actually know about either of them. The most significant solo scene that Sasha receives shows her hanging out with some new friends in the neighborhood. We see them walking around and playing hopscotch, and at one point, the group of girls hides from Sasha for reasons that go unexplained. Sasha ends up falling onto a covered pool and calls out for help, and the pool owner immediately rushes out to help her. Sasha walks home alone, changes into dry clothes, and lies to her mother that she, quote, played in the sprinkler when asked about her wet hair. So, how does this relate to the overall story? Well, your guess is as good as mine. We never see these friends again, and we never get any insight or reflection from Sasha about how she feels about the incident. Because of this, the scene just feels like weightless fluff padding out the runtime, and only further accentuates its lack of focus stemming from its filmmaker's inability to effectively engage with the subject matter. With Aftersun, not only do we get to know Sophie as a headstrong, humorous, sensitive, wise beyond her years preteen, but we feel her growing distance from Callum and her inability to empathize with the frightening complexity of his mental and emotional struggles due entirely to her inherent lack of life experience, something she tragically has no control over. We see Callum in moments of vulnerability, such as his suggestively suicidal confession to the diving instructor and his sobbing breakdown after Sophie gathered a group of strangers to sing He's a Jolly Good Fellow for his birthday. Though Sophie, the movie character, never saw these moments, we know that Charlotte Wells, the writer-director whom Sophie represents within the story, is making an educated guess about experiences that her father had through her adult perspective that she never possibly could have grasped as a child. It is a gesture of affection and empathy from Wells, the closest she can get to holding her father in a loving and understanding embrace now that he is no longer with us, but more importantly, It deepens the rift between the characters and prompts the viewer to formulate their own conclusion about what happened to Callum after the abstract and symbolic ending of the film. The movie properly earns its decision to avoid a definitive conclusion for Callum because it has spent so much time focusing on the intricacies of his character as he relates to his daughter and on his own as an individual. And so, instead of telling us that he eventually took his own life, like Wells' own father did, the film is all the more devastating by simply showing him walking away after saying goodbye to his daughter and entering the dream sequence, leaving reality and reaching his final destination as just a memory in Sophie's mind. Though Jeremy feels absent from most of the narrative of Blue Heron, there are a few distinctive moments that reveal details about his character. During a family trip to the beach, Jeremy intentionally wanders away, prompting the mother to worry and search for him. She eventually finds him down the road at a gas station, casually chatting with somebody, seemingly intentionally ignorant to the panic he has just caused his mother. Jeremy also exhibits strange behavior, such as taking a midday nap on the steps of the front porch, intentionally turning the lights on in the dark room when the father is teaching them all how to process film, randomly climbing on top of the roof of the house, and punching through a window in the middle of the night. This behavior is certainly cause for concern, but there is no sense of rhythm for when they occur in the plot, so the occurrences feel more like random outbursts and gradual escalations leading to a climactic crescendo as one would expect a movie like this to have. The weight of Jeremy's behavior is also felt even less due to how the rest of the family acts around him. The logline of the film describes his, quote, increasingly dangerous behavior, but never once does anyone in the family seem uneasy around him or frightened by his presence. In fact, they are all actually quite affectionate, patient, and caring towards him. One of the most intimate and beautifully shot scenes show all the children in the kitchen, folding paper boats and floating them in the sink, and Jeremy, sitting up on the counter, fills a colander with powdered sugar and lightly dusts it over the children, simulating snowfall. This joyous and gentle moment is witnessed and photographed by the father, showing that not only does he see this happening, but he is also approving and encouraging. This atmosphere aligns with how Jeremy is presented throughout his sparse screen time. He is often seen smiling, actively engaging with his family in activities, and entertaining the children, like when he tosses a massive rock into the ocean to amuse his brothers during their beach trip. This joyous, curious, alert, and aware older brother is the image of Jeremy that dominates the film, and while his erratic behavior is indeed concerning, Jeremy feels far more like a standard, sympathetic, angsty teen than the person whose increasingly dangerous behavior supposedly interrupted the family's fresh start. Jeremy's presentation as a character is even more confusing when you consider the very first lines of the film recited by adult Sasha.
I struggle now to remember much of my childhood. It only comes back to me in small fragments, and even those memories are hard to trust. I do remember his maps. It's true I spent most of my life being angry at him.
This establishes the expectation that something terrible awaits us. Will Jeremy lash out and grievously injure one of the children or one of his parents? Will he set fire to the house with everyone in it? The quantifiably worst thing that Jeremy does is punch through a window in the middle of the night and cut himself, and the worst thing that he does to Sasha is places a stolen keychain atop of a rock sculpture that she built, making her an accessory to shoplifting? So why exactly has she spent most of her life being angry at him? Jeremy never does anything that explicitly threatens the family structure, so the writer-director is quite literally telling us that Jeremy is a bad apple without ever truly showing us why. This lack of narrative friction becomes even more egregious when the mother makes the most consequential decision in the entire movie and decides to place Jeremy in a foster home, after which point the movie effectively ends. The entire second half of the movie, which begins immediately after the mother's decision, jumps over a decade forward and follows Sasha as an adult who is now a filmmaker seemingly creating a documentary about Jeremy's life. Now, this might be a unique perspective if it offered any new insight or revelations about Jeremy or Sasha herself, but it doesn't. We covered the exact same ground as before, but now we don't even get to see the characters firsthand. We're just hearing total strangers talk about them. Telling a story through the eyes of a child achieves an automatic empathy from the audience because most viewers are going to project their own childhood perspective upon the protagonist. However, the story must also establish a sense of individualism and authority related to the overall plot, and Blue Heron forgets to grant Sasha this courtesy. Furthermore, by intentionally abandoning the childhood plotline and transitioning to the adult version of a character we barely know, any goodwill and inherent affection felt for the character completely dissolves, and the vapid malaise of the story becomes the defining characteristic, overshadowing any and all possible sentimentality that the movie so desperately thinks it is achieving. This metatextual shift is unearned, egregious, and just comes across as a somewhat lazy cop-out instead of an honest examination of whatever Rombari was trying to figure out about her own sibling that inevitably inspired this story. Never once do we see how the family dynamic shifted after Jeremy went away. We don't get to feel or even see how his mother dealt with the earth-shattering decision to transfer her teenage son to foster care because she couldn't figure out how to deal with him. Each time this movie briefly brushes with honest reflection or painful revelation, it retreats inward and scuttles back to the basic tenets of quality filmmaking that it thinks it is achieving, but is actually failing to imbue with any depth, complexity, speculation, or fresh perspective. It is the cinematic equivalent of ending an argumentative essay with, "But what do you think?" Naturally, I scrolled through Letterboxd after watching this movie and was understandably greeted with a wall of unanimous praise. I'm not one to cherry-pick minority reviews just because they align with my opinion, but something about the pages and pages of 5-star reviews felt like recency bias. I'm pleased that this film seems to have resonated with a large portion of the people who've watched it, but I can't help but wonder if they are equating its quality to its surface-level filmmaking techniques and not digging deeper and asking what it's actually saying or achieving in relation to its subject matter. It's clear that this film is incredibly personal to Sophie Rombari as an exercise in trying to figure out what was wrong with her older brother, and it's understandable that she didn't want to disrespect or tarnish his memory by depicting things that didn't happen, but unfortunately that makes for a very boring movie, and it begs the question of why it was even made in the first place. Creating art is one of the most personal things a human being can do, but when you put it out into the world to be observed and viewed by others, there's an expectation that it should be engaging and effective in some way. By sending it out into the world, you're also slotting it amongst other works that are trying to achieve a similar effect, and there is an inherent competition in which Blue Heron falls behind. This movie would have been much better and more compelling if Rombari had embarked on a purposefully fictional tale that was heavily inspired by her own childhood but ultimately told an original story. I don't intend this as a direct criticism of Rombari as a filmmaker, since this was her first feature and there's literally nothing else to compare it to, and the list of great directors with unimpressive first movies is far longer than the list of those who got it right the very first time. I will certainly watch whatever her next project is because she does certainly have talent in some regards, but I think the heaps of praise for this particular film are, for the most part, overzealous. Granted, I have seen much worse films in my lifetime, and in the grand scheme of my cinematic frame of reference, Blue Heron skews far more towards the good side than the bad side. However, I do unfortunately think it fails to justify its own existence as a movie, and I think aspiring filmmakers should take a look at this movie as an example of the inherent apprehensions that come with telling such a personal story on such an exposed scale.